So the NATO defense ministers concluded their meetup in Brussels, where they discussed everything from obviously Ukraine to Finland and Sweden joining, as well as some other long-term goals when it comes to the alliance. Right after that, the Munich Security Conference is taking place right now as we speak. And between the two, I've watched videos, read press releases, talked to some folks that I know in those spaces. There's been a lot of good discussions. The brain power in the rooms, whether it was in the NATO meeting or the Munich Security Conference, is outstanding. Just the foreign policy and military know-how between the two is quite staggering. And they've made some good analyses of where Europe stands on the security realm and how the U.S. can support European security with threats like Russia. Now, the one thing, though, that kind of bothered me is the flippant attitude they seem to continue to have about Russia. And maybe they're just trying to remain calm for their general public, but some of the countries almost appear to be in this denial of what Russia is really proposing here, what threat they actually pose to the collective West. Because the Russians are overtly stating it, and it's not just blustery propaganda. The Kremlin has talked about and shown images of ambitions for Moldova, the Baltic nations, who are in NATO. So I'm waiting for the leadership of NATO, the leadership of European countries, and even our own leadership in the United States to directly go to the people and explain what really is at stake here. Because I know Putin has framed this war as a Russian civilizational and existential struggle against the US, NATO, and the collective West. It may not necessarily be the case, but he has cast that die. And unfortunately, his people are now all on board with that. And I talked about that yesterday in the video. Now, if Russia were to win, the consequences would reverberate throughout Europe, obviously, but also would affect Asia and North America. I mean, Russia, as I've said before, would not stop in Ukraine if they win. If Ukraine were to lose, not only would Russia continue to Moldova and potentially test NATO's staying power in places like the Baltics, but it would signal to Beijing that the West has no staying power, that we may talk the talk and we may support up front, but then we just kind of peter out and don't care because it doesn't really affect us in the United States or Canada or even the UK for that matter. It doesn't necessarily affect us, but then we'll be facing a Russia that is crossing potentially into Poland. Or even worse, we face a China crossing over into Taiwan. And that is what Beijing is looking at. Is Europe and the United States willing to go to bat for Taiwan? Would we be down to deal with a wider war in Europe and the Indo-Pacific if Russia were to continue or if China were to push into Taiwan? Because what it seems like right now and what Russia is hoping and China is hoping is that despite all of the West's economic and military power, we aren't willing to flex all of that forward to help an ally in Ukraine. Now I get it, they're not entirely a treated ally, but let's be real. Going forward, they're definitely going to be integrated into the NATO and Western systems. So because of that, the leadership of these countries and the leadership of NATO need to turn to its constituencies and its countries and say, this isn't just a Ukraine fight. This is a fight that the U.S. has to help Ukraine win because eventually it could turn into World War III. We are on the precipice of where Germany was when people were ignoring Germany in the 1930s. We are now ignoring Russia. And I'm not saying we need to go and directly engage Russia as NATO, but we are clearly not doing enough when it comes to Ukraine. So here in the next week or so, Biden is going to visit Poland. He's going to address the world, really, because everyone around the world watches the U.S. president. He's going to address the Ukraine war, which we're coming on the 1-year anniversary. So what I'm hoping he does, which I doubt he will do, but what I would strongly encourage him to do, because I know he watches every single one of my TikToks, is a couple things. In his speech, he needs to do 3 things, and I don't think it's asking that much to do these 3 things. The first thing is announce that the U.S. is sending ATACMS missiles to Ukraine. This gives Ukraine the complete reach it would need, mirrored up with the HIMARS platform, to hit every strategic target with missiles that Russia could potentially use as a threat to Ukraine, including the Kerch Bridge outside of Crimea. Next, I want him to announce that the U.S. is now going to lead the world in confiscating Russian reserves of currency that they have parked in Western nations, and then give that money to Ukraine for them to use. And then finally, we need to not beat around the bush anymore, not kind of say we want this war to end, not say we want Russia to remove its troops, we want to overturn these referendum. We just need to define that a Ukrainian victory is 100% the U.S. goal here, period, end of story. And by that victory, that means Russia is either completely destroyed in Ukraine and not allowed to come back, or they have retreated to a point where the Ukrainian border is restored to the pre-2014, and then, and only then, can peace be negotiated. I just think we need to be more direct and forceful in our verbiage, because Russia certainly is not holding back on its verbiage. And we know that Russia is weakened to probably its weakest level since the 90s at this point right now. So we have to still remain strong, but also we need to provide the support. And I know a lot of you say, well, we need F-16s going there and Predator drones and stuff like that. And you know what? I'm all on board for that. But if we are going to nickel and dime this like we are, we need to throw, I guess, a quarter down every once in a while, which is give them the ATACMS. Give them the ATACMS so that they can hit long-range targets and disrupt all of the supplies coming in to Ukraine. Those same supplies that they use to kidnap thousands of children, to commit war crimes in places like Mariupol and Bucha. This isn't necessarily just a war between 2 countries. We're watching a very similar situation play out in Russia that led up to the Holocaust in 1930s Germany. And we have the opportunity to stop it right now without losing a single Western soldier and at a pittance of cost relative to our total military budget. And in the end, that cost from us pays for a severely weakened Russia that we likely won't have to deal with for decades, and signals to our other potential foe in China that we have the staying power, we have the strength, we have the will, and if you try to do anything like this, it's going to have the same result. I feel like that's a win for us if we're only paying a few $100 billion rather than losing tens of thousands of soldiers and paying over $1 trillion to fight what would essentially be World War III if we let Russia continue to do what it wants to do.